Welcome viewers at home into today's program. In home learning, we'll be doing inflation. So we'll be looking at questions and trying to answer those questions which pertain inflation. So first question is define inflation. This question is having 2 marks. When you define inflation, you should define it in full. So inflation, this is the full definition of inflation. So is the persistent increase. There should be this word, persistent increase or sustained increase or rise in general price level over a period of time. As we know that when we measure inflation, we measure it over a period of time. It can be over a month or it can be over a year. And there is no inflation if the prices are rising and stopping. So inflation happens when the rise in price is persistent or it is sustained. So you get 2 marks for writing the definition of inflation in full. So it's 2 marks or 0. So if the inflation is incomplete, it's 0. But if the definition is complete, you get your 2 marks. So persistent increase in general price level, you get your mark. Over a period of time, you get your mark. That is 2 marks. The definition is complete. Let us look at the second question. Describe 2 types of inflation. Describe 2 types of inflation. And this question is having 6 marks. So the command word here is describe. So you should note the command word. The command word wants you to describe 2 types of inflation. So the first one will be demand. So for knowing that there is demand pull inflation, you will have your 1 mark. Here you haven't described, we have just named the type of inflation. So demand pull inflation. Now you have to explain what is demand pull inflation. As the word says, demand, we have learned about demand. So whereby the consumers were demanding goods, and the law of demand was saying that the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. The lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded. So now we are looking at demand pull inflation. So demand pull is an increase in prices. So demand pull inflation is an increase in price level caused by an increase in aggregate demand. So some books, they say demand pull inflation is an increase in price level caused by excess demand, which means that demand is more than supply. So once there is an excess demand, suppliers are going to increase the prices. So by the increase in aggregate demand can be by households, businesses, government, and foreign buyers. So we have described it. This is the definition. It is an increase in price level caused by an increase in aggregate demand. The aggregate demand can be by households, businesses, government, and foreign buyers. By foreign buyers. And with demand pull inflation, the increase in aggregate demand will result to too much money chasing few goods. That's why sometimes some books separate it to be monetary inflation, because once there is aggregate demand, it will mean that people are now demanding goods. They are now having more money, while the goods which they want to purchase are not enough. So let us explain this using a demand curve, just to remind ourselves or just to make it more clear. We know that we have our demand and supply curve. We have quantity. We have price. The price in emalangeni. So the demand curve, okay, we have just the supply. Let's just draw the supply curve just for your understanding. Then we have the demand curve. Demand curve. This is the original price. And this is the original quantity. This is the original price. We say that demand pull inflation is caused by an increase in aggregate demand. So which means it is an increase in total demand. So the demand curve is going to shift. The demand curve is going to shift to the right. When the demand curve shifts to the right, you can see here. So there is an increase in quantity. So now the price will move upwards from P to P1 due to the increase in aggregate demand. So originally the demand was here, but then the aggregate demand shifts to the right from D to D1, causing the price to increase from P to P1. And if the price continue to increase and increase persistent, it's going to cause inflation. And if you can remember, we say that in the demand and supply topic, we say that to get rid of excess demand, the suppliers have to increase prices. So the prices are going to increase. Again, demand pull can happen when the economy is operating at full capacity. It can happen when the economy is operating at full capacity or there is full employment of resources of production. So it can happen when the economy is operating at full capacity or there is full employment of resources. So there is no more resources or factors of production which can be employed to increase supply. So we cannot employ more labor, we cannot employ more land. So all these factors of production are used at full capacity. The supply cannot increase to meet the increase in demand. So in order to get rid of the increased demand, the only way is to increase the prices because already all the factors of production are operating at full capacity. And again, demand pull inflation can happen when there is full employment. There's full employment, as we know that labor is part of the resources. Full employment of workers. This will mean that more people are having income. They are having disposable income, which they will spend. So once they have disposable income, there'll be an increase in aggregate demand, which is going to push the prices upwards. Then the second type of inflation is an increase in price level caused by higher cost of production. When the cost of production, as we know that when you produce goods, you will need some inputs. It can be raw materials, it can be labor, it can be capital. So capital goods which are needed for the production of other goods and services. Once there's an increase in the cost of production, firms will increase prices in their profit margin. So firms will increase prices to maintain or to protect their profit margins. So once there is an increase in cost of production, that is an expense to the business. So to increase their profit margin, which means that to at least the revenue to be much higher than the cost, they would increase the prices so that they protect or maintain their profit margin. We have learned that most firms want to maximize their profit. So they want to maximize the profit. They want the highest difference between revenue and cost. So once the cost of production increase, firms will increase prices to maintain or protect their profit margin. So we have defined a cost push inflation. You have described how the firm increase prices. So and why they do that. Then you have explained that. Again, with the cost push inflation, sometimes other books include imported inflation as part of cost push inflation because some firms import raw materials from outside the country. Once the cost of importing is high, it is going to also affect the cost of the firms when they produce goods and services. In that way, they are going to increase the prices. So it means that there is an increase in the cost of imported raw material, which results to the firms increasing their prices. So imported inflation is part of cost push inflation. So imported inflation, we know that it is inflation caused by the increase in the price of imports. Let us look at the third question. Discuss the possible causes of inflation. In the examination, most students, when they discuss the possible causes of inflation, they give the types of inflation, which is cost push inflation, demand pull inflation, and sometimes they also separate imported inflation. So while this question requires you to discuss the possible causes of inflation, which means that you have to explain what causes cost push inflation, what causes demand pull inflation. Let us first look at the causes of cost push inflation. As we know that we are learning at the same time we are revising. Cost push inflation. So the causes of cost push inflation, the cause of cost push inflation is increase. So it is cost push inflation is caused by an increase in the cost of production. So that is the cause of cost push inflation. Then this increase may be in a form of one, wages. It can be in a form of wages. So wages can increase more than labor productivity. So as a result, it's going to increase labor costs. So when labor costs increase, the firms are going to increase the prices to maximize or to increase their profit margins. So an increase in wages is part of a cost push inflation. And another cause can be increase in the cost of raw materials. For example, you are making this jacket, so you are going to need the material, etc. So once there is an increase in this cost of raw material, it is going to make the production of this jacket more expensive, and the profits are going to reduce. So to maximize your profit, the firm must also increase the prices. We have learned that indirect taxes are taxes on spending. So increase in indirect taxes like value-added tax, like excise duties, and also import duties. This can be on, the most common one is fuel and oil. Fuel and oil. We know that once there's an increase in fuel prices, goods needs to be transported into the business. So an increase in fuel prices also increases the cost of transporting the goods into the business and out to the customers. And again, oil, as we know that most businesses or most companies need machines to produce goods and services. These machines need oil for operating. So once there's an increase in indirect taxes, the prices of the commodities are going to increase, resulting to an increase in the cost of production. So the businesses have to increase the prices. So as we know that these taxes, most of the burden of indirect taxes are borne by the consumers. So the producers are going to pass this type of taxes to consumers in form of higher prices so that they can be able to protect or increase their profit margin. Another cause of an increase in cost of production can be capital goods are the goods which are needed for the production of other goods and services. They are not needed for their own consumption. So we need this goods so that we be able to produce other goods and services. For example, machinery. Machinery is a form of a capital good. So once there's an increase in the cost of capital goods, it is going to be expensive for the firms, which means that their cost of production has increased. So to maximize or to maintain their profit margin, they have also to increase the prices of the goods, which will result to cost push inflation. And another cause of the increase in cost of production will be, if you can remember the definition of interest rates, we say that interest rates, it's a reward for investing, or it is a charge on borrowing. So if the firm has already taken a loan from the bank to produce goods and services, then there's an increase in the interest rates. So the interest rate increase will result to them paying more money. So interest rate, we know it's an expense. Interest rate paid, we know that it is an expense. So once there is an increase in interest rate, it means that the expense for borrowing that loan will be higher, so causing increase in the cost of production. As a result, the firms are going to increase prices. Demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation. We were looking at the causes of cost push inflation. Now we are looking at the causes of demand pull inflation. So as the question has said, discuss the possible causes of inflation. So the possible causes of inflation can be increase in the cost of production, as we have already mentioned before, which results to cost push inflation. Now we will look at the causes of demand pull inflation. The cause of demand pull inflation is excess demand. So it is excess demand. So the excess demand, we say that it is excess demand. So demand pull inflation is caused by excess demand, which is caused by an increase in aggregate demand. So now let us look at what causes the increase in aggregate demand. The first one is higher consumption. Higher consumption. So when the households increase their consumption of particular goods and services, this will lead to an increase in aggregate demand, which will lead to an increase in prices, which are increased to get rid of the excess demand. And the second one is higher investment. Higher investment. When more entrepreneurs invest, it means that there will be more people who will be employed. So when more people are employed, they are going to earn income. And these people are going to use their disposable income to purchase those goods and services. In that way, there will be an increase in aggregate demand, resulting to an increase in prices. And the third one will be higher government spending or expenditure. As we have said, that demand push in inflation is caused by an increase in aggregate demand. It can be by individuals, it can be by government, it can be by businesses, it can be by exporters. So also the government, when the government increase their spending, the government can increase their spending in terms of wages, paying high wages. It can increase their spending in terms of grants, so unemployment grants. So all this is used to spend on goods and services, which as a result increase aggregate demand, resulting to excess demand and demand push inflation. If you can remember, we said that exports are goods which are bought from a country to another country. It means that they are exporting the goods to their countries. For example, some people can buy goods from Swaziland to their home countries. So when they export these goods, it means that the demand for our local goods will be high. In that way, once there's an increase in the demand for our local goods, it's going to increase the aggregate demand, as a result, increasing the price to get rid of excess demand. So high net exports also results to demand push inflation. Then our question has been answered now. As I said, discuss the possible causes of inflation. So discuss the possible causes of inflation. We have talked about cost push inflation and demand pull inflation. So, and what causes these two? So we have answered that question. So, but you must make sure that you state it clearly that it is caused by excess demand, or it is caused by increase in aggregate demand, which results to demand pull inflation. Then, even if you can be asked what causes demand pull inflation, you'll be able to explain it. You'll be able to explain what causes a demand pull inflation. As we have said, it's higher consumption, a higher investment, higher government spending, higher net export. So don't claim that the question will always come like this. Discuss the possible causes of inflation. Even if you can write that the causes of inflation, you can say that the causes of inflation is demand pull. Then you explain what causes demand pull inflation. And you also explain that the causes of inflation is cost push inflation. So which is the increase in the cost of production pushes up the prices of the goods and services. Then you explain what causes the cost push inflation. Not to explain what is cost push, what is demand pull, but once you write it like this, you must then explain what causes demand pull inflation, what causes the cost push inflation, not to define, because once you define, you haven't answered the question, because the question has asked you what causes inflation, not to explain inflation. So when you say, not to explain the types of inflation, these are the types of inflation, but the causes of them, we have explained them below. Excess demand or increase in the cost of production. Viewers at home, let us take a short break. We'll be back.
get set. I get set.
Welcome back, viewers at home. Let us continue with our lesson. So let us look at the next question. What is meant by a retail price index? This question is having 3 marks. What is meant by a retail price index? So you explain the meaning of a retail price index. As you see that the marks were 3, and this meaning is also long. So it's an index that measures changes in prices. Changes in prices. Because when you use a retail price index, we use it when we want to calculate the inflation rate, which is the change in inflation. Then over time, as you have noted in the definition of inflation, that inflation is measured over time. For a representative sample of goods, all the 3 components of the definition is there. Measures changes in prices over time. For what? For a representative sample of goods. As we know that in a retail price index, we don't include all goods, but we sample the goods. I think that will be explained further in the next question. So you get your 3 marks. So you get your 3 marks. You get your 3 marks. Let us look at our next question. Explain how a retail price index is calculated. This question can be asked as explain how inflation is measured. So in an examination, whether the question asks you to explain how a retail price index is calculated or explain how inflation is measured, the answer which is used to answer this question is the same. So this question is 7 marks. It's 7 marks. So the first step when we calculate the retail price index is it's selecting. We know that a base is something to start on. So even when we want to calculate a retail price index, we have to have a year where we are going to start on when we calculate the changes. So we select a base year. And if you note, the key or the command words say explain. They don't say state. In most cases, the students mark the work on their own before the examiners. Because they see the 7 marks and the steps are 7, then they start listing the steps. You don't list, you explain, because they've said explain. So you select a base year. We know that this year is an initial period. And the government statisticians select a year or select a standard year so there were no dramatic changes in the prices. So at least this year was stable. There were not much up and down of prices. And this base year is given a figure. This is much important in your answer. Figure of 100. And the price level. So this base year is given a figure of 100. And the price level in other years are compared to this figure. So these two are very important when explaining the base year to get your full marks for this point. So the standard year in which there were no dramatic changes. So there were no dramatic changes. So it is used as a base year. And this figure, this base year is given the figure of 100. So it is given the figure of 100. Even if we are going to get 1 mark for writing all this, without this information, this point is not going to earn a mark. So as I've said that, don't be misinformed by this mark. So and say that I'm just going to list all the 7 steps. These steps must be guided by the command words of explain. So explain how a retail price index calculated, or explain how inflation is measured. You need to explain your points. We know that there are so many people in the country or in any other country. So it would be impossible for the statisticians to include everyone in the research of calculating inflation rate. So they sample the population. So in the sampling of population, what is happening is that a number of households are asked to keep records of their expenditure. So a number of households, they have to keep records. They have to keep records of their expenditure. So which means that when you spend, you record it down. When you spend, you record the spending down. So a sampling of population, a number of households are asked to keep a record of their expenditure. After that, we have sampling of goods. Sampling of goods or items to be included. So after the population has been sampled, there should be also the sampling of goods or items to be included, because it's not all the items which are to be included in the basket of goods and services. So in most cases, as we know that our items are separated into 2, there are those who are luxury and there are those who are basic. So basic items which are needed for our living, and luxury, we just need them to make our life more comfortable. So in most cases, we include the basic items in the goods to be sampled. We need to attach weights according to the relative importance of the items. According to the relative, as we have said that these goods they have different importance. Some are luxury, some are necessities. So we need to attach weights according to their relative importance or according to their priority. And the higher the amount spent on that particular good, the greater the weight ascribed to that particular good. Which means that if we have spent a huge amount on maybe milli-meal, so milli-meal is going to be ascribed a higher weight than the other goods. 5, choice of outlets. Outlets to obtain the information. So as we want to obtain the changes in price of the commodities, to get the changes in price of the commodities, the researchers need to visit a different outlets. So they choose the outlets to obtain the information. So they choose the outlet to get the information on changes of prices. Then the sixth one, change from one period to another. So here, as we have said that we have to attach weights on the goods according to their relative importance. So the changes from one period to another is the weights of the items. The weight of the items in the baskets. Changes, as we know that we want the changes here. Changes to give a weighted price index. There is no mark for writing the formula in this point. So once you write a formula, you are not going to get any mark. You write the words. The weight of the items in the baskets of product are multiplied by their changes to give weighted price index. Then the last step is the inflation, the last step, then the inflation. Is calculated. So then the inflation rate is calculated. For example, we say that the base year, from the beginning, we say that the base year, we give it the figure, which is 100. And in step 6, we say that the changes in price of the items selected are found by visiting a number of outlets. Then after visiting the number of outlets, we have weighted the goods according to their priorities. Then we multiply the changes by their weights to give the weighted price index, which maybe if it is 105, the inflation rate will mean that it is 105 minus the base year of 100. It will mean that the inflation rate is 5% for that period. So you get your 7 marks after writing all this. You don't cut, you don't list, because in the examination you must follow the command words. When they say explain, you must explain. When they say list, you must list, because the examiners want to see whether you are able to understand the command words. Let us look at another question. Explain how all prices may cause inflation. This was 4 marks. How? This is an analysis question. So we have to explain how all prices may cause inflation. After you have learned about the causes of inflation, you can see that this increase in oil prices will cause it's going to cause a cost push inflation. So high oil prices will cause cost push inflation because because it is going to increase the cost of production. Going to increase the cost of production. Then to maintain or increase their profit margin, firms will increase prices. So this is the how high oil price may cause inflation. So we have explained that you know that this will cause cost push inflation because it is going to increase the cost of production. So it's going to increase the cost of production. You have your 2 marks here. Then now you are answering the how part. To maintain or increase their profit margin, firms are going to increase prices. So that is how the high oil prices is going to cause inflation, because the firms will increase the prices so that they will be able to maximize or maintain their profit, or to increase their profit margin. Then you get your other 2 marks, you get your 4 marks. So you have answered the 2 parts of the question. So the marks are there to guide you. Let us move on to another question. Discuss whether a government should be concerned when its economy has a high inflation rate. It has a high inflation rate. This is 7 marks. This is a higher order question because it needs you to argue, then you take a stand, because it is an open-ended question. Discuss whether, do you think, would you advise, is it wise? All those are open-ended questions. They are higher order questions. It needs you to argue. You argue for, against, then you conclude. And remember that in economics, we don't take a stand in the beginning. So we don't take a stand in the beginning in economics. You just argue, then you take a stand at the end. There is no marks for taking a stand at the beginning of your answer. So make sure you just argue before you take a stand. Okay? Because this question wants us to look at the both sides of a high inflation rate. Let us start with the positive side. And you, in this question, you don't write A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3 when you answer it. You write it in a paragraph form. So a government, when there's a high inflation rate, it's going to, okay, let us start with the positive side, because the negative side, because there are more negative sides than the positive side. There's going to be, that's going to cause a fall in the value of money. So when you explain, this is just the point you have stated it, then you have to explain. So each unit of money will buy fewer products. So we have explained. So we explained each unit of money is going to buy fewer products. Then this is just one point well explained. Then you need another point. It redistributes income in an unplanned way. As we know that inflation benefits others and others lose from it. For example, those who gain are workers with a strong bargaining power because they will be able to bargain for a wage increase which is more than the inflation rate. And again, those who benefit are borrowers. So they benefit if the interest rate is below the inflation rate because in real terms they bring less value of that amount than it can purchase. So those two, so you explain. Then you have a mark here and a mark here. Then you have a mark here. So you have your 3 marks for this side. It's either you explain this point in full or you explain the other point in full. But it is better to explain at least 2 or 3 points in full, so that if one is not well explained, the other one is going to compensate for that one. There are other disadvantages of a high inflation rate, which include imposes extra costs on firms. As we know that when there is inflation, additional staff time will be needed to estimate future prices. And again, there will be costs which are going to be incurred on changing the prices, maybe on the catalogs or slot machines or price lists, which are cost menu costs. And again, there will be other costs which will be incurred by the firm, whereby money paid to the firm will be losing its value as soon as it is received, which is called leather shoe costs. So you can explain. And again, another negative side is that it creates uncertainty. So it is difficult to budget as the prices fluctuate. So it is difficult even for the government to budget, for the businesses, even for the individuals. And another one, it harms the balance of payment position. Because as there is inflation here, if the inflation rate is higher than that of our rivals, our goods will be priced in competitive, which means that our local goods will be expensive. So in that case, the import revenues will be higher than the export revenue will be higher than the import expenditure. In that way, we will have a deficit in our balance of payment. So any of the points explained. So, but you just, for the 3 marks, you just have to explain one and list one. Then you get the 3. Then you don't write advantages, disadvantages. So you have written your positive side. Then you say, however, so you use joining words. You use joining words. You don't write the advantages and disadvantages. However, may encourage. So you use joining words. However, may encourage firms to expand. May encourage firms to expand. So in a low and stable inflation, firms may be encouraged to expand, as they will be optimistic about future sales. So when they expand, there will be more jobs, opportunities, so which will reduce unemployment. There will be increase. You can explain with any increase government revenue from taxes, As we know that they will be charged company tax, and those who will be working in the firm, as it expands, it's going to be, maybe if it uses labor intensive method, it's going to need more labor, which will earn income and charge income tax. So you can explain using either of those points. Then another point which you may use is that prevent workers being made redundant in a declining industry. So once there is a stable inflation, so workers will be prevented from being redundant in a declining industry. So they will continue to work because there is an increase in aggregate demand. The products which are produced by that industry is now demanded. There's been an increase in demand. So a worker's job will be protected. And again, as I've said, that you can use either of these points. If you haven't explained with this one here, this one is just a point on its own. So you can use that one as a point on its own to be the third point, if you, so to be a third point. But you only need 2 marks for this level. You only need 2 marks for this level. Then you have your conclusion. You have your conclusion. You have your conclusion. So, which is now you are having 5. For arguing, you are having 5. You have 4, you have against. So you only need 2 marks, which is 1 point well explained. You need 1 point well explained to get your 2 marks. So you need 1 point well explained, you get to your 2 marks. Then you conclude. You write in conclusion,